And we will have a session, we will have a webinar series. Shamron, do you want to do a little commercial maybe really quickly about next year's series, how we're going to chunk them? Put you on the spot, friend.
Put me on the spot as I'm looking for all the links to post in the chat. No, super excited. Next year, we are shifting gears a little bit with how we're doing our focus and hoping to offer some mini series chunks, and we will be exploring the topics. Some of the topics that we'll be exploring are alternative dispute resolution and how UDL might support schools and districts in going through that process, but also hopefully avoiding getting to that process. We'll be looking at different tips and tools around accessibility for our learners. And then we're also going to be taking a different spin on how we might be moving through the process of identifying students for special education and making sure that the goals that are drafted for students on IEPs are in alignment with best practices around inclusive literacy and universal design. So just a little bit of what we've got going on in the background as it's May, and we are so excited and planning for next year. So thanks for putting me on the spot, Elisa.
Friends, we were all just like, oh my gosh, it's so nerve-wracking to be in charge of links. And I'm like, hey, Shamron, want to talk about something else? But we are excited, friends, because this last year and even last academic year, our focus has been a little bit of that 30,000 view about learning and
left my phone in the
and so next year we get a little bit more technical, like what does it look like on the ground level? And of course, we'll have some experts supporting us in doing that. And of course, we'll have an opportunity to talk about it as practitioners, right? And as parents. I'm a mother of a special needs young adult. And we've all been in education so long. So we're gonna pull from your experiences too, but get a little bit more technical. What does it look like on the ground level if I have to advocate for my child and or in the system in which I support? So today's last day of school session, it's around writing. We're super excited. Little background on me, I am a math teacher at heart still. And so this piece about writing really got me excited too, because so much of the challenges my learners face sometimes was around not just literacy in general, but the specificity around writing and the implications and how writing is a tool. So today, I think is going to be, depending on your content area, no matter what I would say, no matter your content area, you might find nuggets that are going to help support you either from the parent seat, from the teacher seat, even leadership side. So as always, on the next slide, we like to, again, you can tell how we're all friends in here. And so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. At any time, ask or answer a question, share an idea or connection you see, and a hyperlink, right? Our discussion boards have been such an amazing place for our colleagues across, actually it's a global document, right? Because we have people from all over signing up and watching our webinars later at a different time and even live. So feel free to share a hyperlink of some of the goodies, some nugget that you saw, you learned about. This is a community, almost a community of practice. We Californians know that term, right? This is a community of practice where we get to learn from each other. So to bring us into the room, thanks for the pacing, Becky. To bring us into the room, think about writing in the last 24 hours. Happy belated Mother's Day for those that are biological or otherwise mothers. So think about the last 24 hours. In what ways have you used writing? Feel free to drop it in the chat and or unmute if you're an external processor like most of us Cecil girls are. All right, so everything from the personals, right? The text, the birthday cards, the Mother Day cards, the emails, texting for sure, that's a language if you ever watch a teenager's phone. Aurora conducted observations and took descriptive notes. That's right. I remember those literal notes. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for the warm welcome. I've communicated through several emails to admin to districts and school sites, writing summaries, to revise, design, and outline a synchronous course on UDL today. Wonderful. So if we're here, we're the choir. Imagine if we didn't have that tool in our bucket and know how we could dive into, we could do a whole other webinar on the hows and the whats, depending on the buckets of what you shared, like email. Is it an email to my husband, or is it an email to my parent? Or is it an email that I know, if you're an administrator, could be used against me later, right? Like all the time and the thinking and the cognitive demand that it takes depending on the audience, right? But yeah, absolutely, Celia. Writing is definitely everywhere. So we're going to focus a little bit on that nuance today and how to remove barriers, right? Because that's what CAST and CECL are all about, is removing barriers, right? Into learning has no limits. And so those are the images of our pictures pre-COVID, probably now, right, of the team. We are your statewide team supporting different counties across the state of California. And so why we've been talking about the fact that today's the last day of school is because we've gone through these sessions for the last, it's the second Monday of every month, right? So that link that Shamron put there for the slide deck is a master slide deck, friends, that has all the decks, so that you either love that or drive you crazy, depends on how you look at it. But it has all the slide decks of every session all in one link. If you would like them separately, we can most be happy to send them to you separately too, because I have them both ways, right? Like multiple ways of representation. But all the information is there, and all the resources and all the rich conversations that have occurred the last month. So one of the pieces that we like to circle back every time we get together is this idea of having an operational definition of inclusion, right? I'm sure we can, again, do a whole webinar. What is inclusion? What does it mean? So we just share an operational definition so that we know where our thinking was behind designing these sessions. And so inclusion for this context is providing or involving, including all people in an environment regardless of their differences, right? And then there's an added layer to that where it gets to belonging and valuing and respecting, right? And what might it take to do that? And then when we talk about literacy, the overarching operational definition we use in this context is the ability to produce, interpret, and understand language. And again, what is the added part to that is absolutely questioning, right? Building capacity around questioning, critiquing, and of course, the role that the social context plays into it. And so again, we just bring that up, not because you don't know, but just so that you know the framework where we're coming from. So today's goals, excuse me, are together we will deepen our understanding of inclusive practices by exploring strategies to minimize barriers to writing. And so you're already probably thinking about like, oh, this is what I do, or this is what was helpful to me in the learner's seat. We're going to leverage some of that today too, and then engage all learners in the writing process around content areas like how do we make connections? Now, friends, we're not going to get to the granular level of like in a math class, blankety blank. You might in the discussion boards, but today we're going to stay a little bit maybe at that 15,000 view where you will be able to make those connections from your seat. So we have some documents to support you today, a home-based document. And this document, again, houses all 9 webinars, lots of, if you want to go down a rabbit's hole, that is the document for you. Lots of hyperlinks, lots of goodies where we find an article or a resource, we just drop it there, even though we may not talk about it during the webinar, but that lives there. A note-taking guide just for your own purposes. Feel free to download it and make your own copy if that is in support of your learning. And then discussion board today will be an opportunity where the format is going to be, we'll talk about the barrier, we'll share something that in our experience has helped reduce it, and then we'll give you an opportunity to share with each other via a discussion board. We're not going to do breakout rooms today, so hopefully effective filter down, right, at 3:30 on a Monday. And then we invite you always to take the time to self-regulate as you wish. So consider the ways that you can create a better space. So camera on or off, whatever your brain needs. What is the best way to perceive the content, slide decks, home-based note-taking guides? And then what is your preference for thinking today? What can your tank hold? Are you feeling like you want to externally process? Do you want to feel like, you know what, I just want to listen while I grade papers or do some multitasking? As your brain needs today, we're here to serve. So to ground us, we found this quote and we thought it was so kind of compelling. This idea that reading is like breathing in and writing is like breathing out. So to that end, Becky, you're going to walk us through this little activity together, which I fell in love with. Not on a real, not real AKG. You traumatized me a little bit, but I think it's going to be a good one for this purpose.
Thank you, Elisa. So we're going to start with a little bit of self-reflection around writing. So our activity is, like Elisa said, an EKG. So we're going to ask you to create your own writing EKG. So if you were to plot the events of your writerly life, what would your writing EKG look like? So we're just going to ask you on a piece of scratch paper, notebook paper, just draw a line and think about above the line being events that were positive and below the line events that were negative. And think about any events connected to writing, whether it's learning how to write, being a student of writing, being an adult writer, or the teaching of writing. And just kind of plot some of those events across your line. Again, positive events above the line, negative below, and then kind of connect those and see what your writing EKG looks like. And this is just a self-reflection activity. So we'll give you about 2 minutes to work on this and think through those events. All right, so thank you for engaging in the self-reflection. As we continue our time together, hopefully you'll be able to make some connections back to some of those negative events, thinking about yourself as a learner of writing, and then thinking about when we start thinking about the designing to minimize those barriers, how might those positive events, those positive experiences you have give you some insight in how to design to minimize some of those barriers. So here is our operational definition around writing. This was something that was really hard for us to come up with just a straight, simple definition. Like you saw with our inclusive literacy, we're always adding on and reiterating or iterating on our versions of definitions. So here's what we have landed on as of now. This may be very different next year. Writing expresses who we are as people, fosters our ability to refine and explain ideas, and demonstrates our learning or thinking. The act of writing reinforces learning. Increasingly, writing is used as a means for students to demonstrate learning or justify their thinking, not just in English and history classes, but in math and science as well. So really just thinking about how writing goes beyond being just a tool for communication. It's personal, it's reflective, and it is supportive of learning in all content areas. So when we think about what is it that proficient writers do, what is it that expert writers do? Well, they tend to follow a process, not necessarily in lockstep fashion, but there is a somewhat of a method to the madness, I guess you could say. There is a process that writers follow. Brainstorming, planning and developing, draft, revise, edit, and publish. And again, this is not necessarily a linear process. Authors might be planning and developing and then revising their plan and development before they even move on to drafting. So we know that writers might go through this process in a sitting, or it may be a process that's taken across an entire unit of study. And unfortunately, we also know that the writing process sometimes poses challenges for some of our learners. I'm imagining that many of you, when you did your EKG, saw some or remembered some experiences where writing might have been a challenge for you. So we're going to take a moment to hear from some learners' perspectives on their experiences with writing. So we're going to give you the option to choose to engage with one of our learners: Aiden, 1st grade, Lucy, 5th grade, or Sam in 12th grade. And we're going to put the timer on for 5 minutes. The longest video, I believe, is Lucy, which is 3.5 minutes. So you'll have enough time to watch one of the videos and to think about our guiding question below. As you engage with one of the students' experience with writing, what resonates with you? So feel free to turn off your camera. Just take a couple minutes to watch the video, and then think about, well, how is this resonating with you? How is this learner's experience with writing resonating with you? If you would like to drop that in the chat before we come back in 5 minutes, that would be great. If you want to just kind of have a personal reflection around that, that's an option as well.
Becky, will we have an option to unmute and share? We want to say something.
Yeah, at the end of the 5 minutes. Thank you,
Perfect.
Elisa.
Is it possible while we're doing this to play one of the sessions here in our live webinar, and then folks can mute us and go, and if they choose not to watch the one that we showcase here?
I believe if they mute us, they'll mute their whole sound system, so they can't play the video. I could be wrong about that. Are there any other questions?
Sue, I'll drop some links to those videos for you in the chat. You can also access the video of your choice by going directly to the slide deck and clicking on the video that you would like to choose to watch.
Shamron, I have them really quick. You want me to drop them, or you have them?
Thank you. That'd be great, Elisa.
Got it. Friends, it's slide 15, but I'm just going to copy and paste these video hyperlinks also. A ver, let's see if they work.
Yep, they look perfect.
All right, hopefully everyone had a chance to engage with one of the learners and their experience with writing. I see a few comments in the chat, definitely around the idea, the physical barrier of writing. Aurora wrote the idea or misconception that writing should be a paper pencil task, definitely. Yeah, Carol, I agree. Lucy's writing challenges were articulated so well. I'm sure she's an amazing writer. Yeah, her speaking abilities were great, and her vocabulary was awesome. Yeah. Yeah, the idea of getting the words down on paper. Stacy's writing about and connecting with Lucy's message or Lucy's experience as well. Yeah, difficult through college. Yeah, and the idea of, yeah, using speech to text and then developing revision strategies. Yeah, often our learners have amazing thoughts. It's just sometimes getting it, the act of getting it from the brain down to paper can be, there's something, there's a barrier in there. So why not provide those options to our learners as speech to text, a way to support that and minimize that barrier. Yeah, Lucy and her vocabulary, yeah, almost like her brain thinks for the words faster than she can write them, so she skips them. Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
I really connected with how we can use speech to technology and how that really can be so supportive of revising and editing and going back to your writing and really making sense of it. I really see that as such a tool and such a benefit for our learners.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I see a couple more comments. Love the flexible means to reach the goal. If you've been to any of our webinars or PL, you know we're always talking about those flexible means to a firm goal with flexible means. So thank you for sharing that. And then Sam was able to express his thoughts in writing once the barrier of handwriting neatly was removed. Yeah, despite his best efforts, he couldn't keep up with his thoughts when he had to handwrite. Exactly. So thank you for sharing those. We're going to pass it over to Sylvia to have us start the conversation around identifying barriers that might exist in our instructional design around writing, and then we'll do some brainstorming around minimizing those barriers.
Cool, thank you, Becky. Happy to be here, everyone. My name is Sylvia, and I am newer to the CECL team, so I'm really excited to be a part of this final webinar of the year. I've been watching along and have been really impressed, and I just also want to give a shout out to anyone who's maybe joining this webinar afterwards and seeing the recorded version. I hope you're able to kind of follow along and appreciate your participation asynchronously. So as Becky mentioned, and so many of you have pointed out through the chat discussion, these barriers can really get in the way of students being able to get their ideas from inside their head down onto the paper. And we at CECL can kind of think about these barriers as a way to kind of organize our thinking about barriers. We can bucket them into these 4 categories: materials, methods, assessments, and environment. And we're going to go through what barriers might look like in each of those 4 categories. Let me head to the next slide, please. Cool, thank you. So barriers can exist in the materials. So, oops, did we skip ahead a little bit? It's all good. Yeah, so oh, something got a little mixed up. It's all good. We're gonna roll with it. So barriers in the materials. We want to think about how the content is being represented. This is a question you can ask yourself, or if you're a coach, ask yourself if you're a teacher. If you're a coach, you could ask the teachers that you're working with, or if you're in an admin role and coaching teachers, you can ask this question. You know, how is the content being represented to students? In terms of methods, how is that content then being delivered? Is it visual? Is it auditory? Is it a combination of both? Is it asynchronous, synchronous? We're in a virtual world. In terms of assessment, how then are students being asked to demonstrate their understanding or demonstrate their learning? And finally, the environment. How is the actual climate? And when we say environment, we're thinking both the physical environment of the classroom, but also that climate or culture that exists within the classroom that really creates the conditions for learning to happen.
Sylvia, I'll jump in really quickly. We can stay
Please.
on this slide, Becky. Friends, the idea is that as designers of learning, we're making decisions around these buckets anyway. No matter if I'm a novice teacher or an experienced teacher, I'm making decisions around materials, methods, assessment, and environment. This framework or this way to look at it is just saying, as we consider these buckets, how might we, and then the barrier chunk comes in. Because sometimes my people are like, Elisa, this is just one extra thing. I'm sorry, I can't imagine one single teacher who's not going to think about what materials they're using in service of the lesson goal, right? What methods, all these decisions are being made. We're trying to coach to the alignment of removing barriers towards the learning goal. Right,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think what I wanted to mention earlier is we so often say that the barrier is in the design and not the learner. And we shoulder that responsibility as educators to design with these barriers in mind and try to minimize those barriers as to the best that we can. So we're going to go through each of these different kind of categories, and these are not exhaustive lists by any means, but we want to offer these as examples of potential barriers within materials, methods, assessments, and environment, just to really get in the habit of thinking through these different lenses and kind of develop that habit of mind, like Elisa was saying, around applying a UDL lens to your kind of standard planning or design process. So we're going to start with materials. Yeah, go ahead. Excellent. So let's say we have this lesson plan where the learning goal sounds something like this. Students will write an argument and provide evidence from the reading to support their claim. You probably, if you're an educator, have seen a similar kind of lesson to this at some point in your educational career. If I'm thinking about this question of how the content is being presented, right away, a potential barrier I could anticipate is the text complexity of whatever it is that students are being asked to pull from to support their claim. So if it's a text that does not match the student's reading level, or if I have a range of learners in my classroom with variable reading levels on various reading levels, I can probably assume right away that the text complexity is not going to be accessible to everyone. So some options I might consider to minimize that barrier. We already were talking about technology a little bit earlier in terms of giving students tools to demonstrate their thinking. Absolutely, technology can be used, leveraged to give students access to content as well. We could have texts that come in multiple different levels where the content stays the same, but the reading level changes. We can provide audio or video versions of text. We can do a read aloud with our students in class so they're hearing it. We can offer graphic organizer or other scaffolds to help them help their comprehension with the text. So just as like a really granular example, this on the left, you'll see an image. It's literally just a screen grab of a Google Drive folder that I have that contains audio versions of the book The Outsiders, common middle school text that a lot of schools use. At some point in my journey, I actually had the CD version. Remember, y'all remember CDs? How we actually used those, or really remember how we used cassette players for audiobooks? Yeah, Sharon's giving me a thumbs up. So I took those and digitized it. So I had it in a Google Drive, all the chapters from the read aloud, and that way, or the audio version rather, and that way I could share it with students and they could access the text that way. We mentioned level reading. Many of you might have heard of this. I even remember, yeah, records. That is going way back. Many of you might know of this particular tool, Newsela or Newsela. I've heard it pronounced both ways, but it is a website that provides a library of nonfiction current events articles, and each article is leveled differently. So the content stays the same, it's the same article, but you can alter the reading level, which is another really nice way to provide options for students. Next slide, please. All right, so here we're going to turn it over to you all and think about your own context. And Shamron is on it. She just dropped in the chat a direct link to our discussion board. You can put your ideas there, or you may choose to just drop your ideas in the chat, but we want to give you some time. If you click that link to the discussion board, you'll see a space for you to think about this particular lesson. And think about what options you might provide to minimize potential barriers. It could be text complexity, which is what we've been talking about. You could also think about, well, what options might I provide for writing tools? Or technology in and of itself can pose a barrier sometimes if it's a text tool or a piece of technology that students are familiar with. And then paper and pencil is something that we've already been talking about a little bit. Ooh, and I am seeing some interesting ideas come up here. So I'm going to stop talking and let you all participate in the discussion board and or chat. And this is a space to beg, borrow, and steal. If you see something in there that you're like, ooh, I want to know more about that or like it, feel free to +1, hyperlink, ask questions. Yes, we got some love for News LA. But use this time to jot down some potential options or tools that you use or would like to use to minimize those barriers. All right, come back together. Jot down your final thought, wrap up the sentence you're on. And I'm seeing some really great ideas come up in the discussion board. I'm going to give space to anyone who wants to unmute themselves and offer a tool that they use or a tool that they have just been introduced to that they want to explore more. For anyone who would like to unmute themselves, please do so.
I think that the spending time practicing the app separate from the reading or the writing lesson is so important. And I just want to put that out there just as a parent of a student who's dyslexic, because he often doesn't know how to use the app, he won't use it because he's already had less success in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Stacy. I completely agree. And I sometimes hold on to this saying, marry the function and not the tool. So we want to make sure that we are also being really mindful of not necessarily giving students tons of tools just for the sake of it. We want to be really intentional about whatever tool we're offering because it serves a certain function, and that way we can practice it and not have that cognitive overwhelm of trying to learn both a tool and whatever the reading or writing or content area task is. But yeah, thank you so much.
I think it's also important to note that most, if not all, of the tools and ideas and strategies that were listed in that discussion board should be utilized and available to all students at all times, regardless of designation. You don't need a 504 plan or an IEP to access those tools. And if we're really mindful in our design, and I really appreciated Stacy's comment about taking the time and being intentional about training them in the use of the tools so that if it speaks to their learning style, they're going to incorporate it into their learning practice themselves. And I was reminded of what often happened, and maybe you all have experienced this recently. We're in testing season and everybody wants to add those designated supports on to state testing. And so you're checking all those boxes, but then I think, have they been using those tools throughout the year? Is that really going to help them? Or is it just an added feature that may not get used or might confuse them further? So being really intentional about it and not overwhelming with so many choices and so many options, but strategically probably rolling them out is what comes to mind for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's too late by the time they take the test. Yeah, we want to give students opportunity to practice, and get to reflect and know themselves as learners. That's going to be much more powerful knowledge going into a test than an add-on scaffold at the very end.
All right, we're going to move into looking at another one of our instructional design elements or buckets, that of methods, and thinking about what might be some barriers to writing in the area of methods. So we're using the same writing goal around students will write an argument and provide evidence from the reading to support their claim. So when we think about the methods, we're thinking about how is the content being delivered? How did the teacher plan for her learners to receive the content, to access the content? So some of the barriers we chose that might show up would be around the topic, limited modeling of the writing process, or the prompt being communicated in only one way. So we chose to kind of focus on the options to minimize the barrier of limited modeling of the writing process. And just like Sylvia said earlier, this is not an exhaustive list of barriers that would show up in or could show up in the methods of a writing lesson. We just chose a few to kind of think through and jog your thinking with. So in order to provide some options to minimize that barrier, we thought that the best way to do that would be to provide models and exemplars of the entire writing process to ensure that our learners really understand what each step of the process looks like, what the beginning of writing should look like, and what a completed piece should also look like. So here are some tools that could be supportive of modeling the writing process. So the first one, this is just a planning template, a graphic organizer. It is a boxes and bullets format, really structuring or helping our learners structure their essay. The middle would be an example of how you might use exemplar text, how you might annotate exemplar text and really highlight those author techniques, those authors' craft, what it is that you want your learners to do as authors or as writers, and really giving them a model of that, seeing what the final product should look like. And then another tool that could support the writing process would be a checklist. So this particular checklist is really around the revision stage of writing, thinking about word choice, elaboration, and then evidence. So again, just some options that might be supportive to minimize that barrier of limited modeling of the writing process. But as we saw in the last example, we know that you will have some really great options to minimize barriers within the method. So we're going to follow the same process and give you another 2 minutes to share and learn strategies in the chat box or again on the discussion board. Whoops. I was trying to turn on the timer. There we go. All right, we're going to ask you to come back. Let's see if I can get to the document. See what some of our ideas around options for methods are. Anybody like to unmute and share out? See lots around models, exemplars, entire process. Thank you, Carol.
So I just saw a comment in the chat from Jillian, and I'm the one who mentioned Step Up to Writing. And I had done a practicum for students at Claremont Graduate University, and they also use Step Up to Writing. And they said they had never, many of them said they had never been taught how to write. It's very interesting, but I love that. I love Step Up to Writing. I think it's great. And adults can use it too.
And adults can use it too. That's awesome.
Errol, I love you. It's so great. I used it to edit my master's thesis. So I've also used it for a student with autism who had expressive language challenges and had never written a paragraph and would not even dictate a paragraph for someone else to document because formalizing complete sentences and organizing their thoughts was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I used Step Up to Writing and it was so concrete for them. And my district is middle school and high school. I've co-taught and worked with so many general ed teachers. And I feel like everyone calls things different by different names. And so like this year I'm at a middle school and a teacher was calling a thesis statement a topic sentence. And it was for an essay. So I thought that was a little misleading, but that's just what they were calling it. And in high school, they would never call it that. And our middle schools are only 2 years. And so I thought it's so annoying to get bogged down in the names of things when they're so inconsistent. When if the teachers were taught this color-coded strategy that they use to Step Up to Writing, for kids, it doesn't matter what the names are. If they can memorize the colors and it's 4 colors, they can get all the pieces in the ingredients. And so having that sort of simplified language, it's really good for EL students as well. And for students who just really get overwhelmed with that aspect of writing, to distill it down into like 4 components. And then just practicing those, starting from small paragraphs to bigger multi-paragraph things, is literally life-changing for kids who need to grow in their writing skills as they move up through school.
Did they pay you to say that?
No, and
I
I
was just
rarely
gonna
have
ask if you're
found
the
people who know
salesperson.
about it or are trained in it, but it's like a sword I will die on. I want everyone to know about Step Up to Writing. So
I love it too.
Thank you both for sharing out. For the sake of time, and I really hate to say that, we're going to move to our next portion, but I saw some really great ideas on the discussion board and in the chat. So we're going to make sure that we save the chat today and add some of those ideas to the discussion board. So you'll have those after our session today.
Yeah, I've been cutting and pasting as best I can
you.
without editing people's. This is what I think they meant, but in the chat. Yeah,
Thank
but
you,
writing is such an interesting piece, right? We have these structures that we kind of commit to, and then through this process, we think, what option might the students select, right? Because it's about creating those options for the kids to choose from. So the assessment bucket, right? Like, how will we know what they know essentially? So grounding us back into that learning goal, right? Because otherwise options feel, I told my team, we're not like Carnival cruise directors creating as many options so everybody's happy, because that's overwhelming and not sustainable. Grounded in the learning goal of students will write an argument and provide evidence from reading to support their claim. We, thinking about that reflective question, how is the learning being demonstrated? We again brainstorm just a couple. I'm sure we could have had a document just for the anticipated barriers that you've seen evidence in your context. We said limited to one type of writing product, right? That writing only looks like blank. If the goal is to write an argument and provide evidence, what does that look like? And then also the idea that sometimes the final product is the focus. And it could be, right, unintended consequence of saying, this is worth 20%. In secondary, we love giving percentages to stuff, right, to communicate value. This is going to be 10% of your grade or 20% of your grade. So where is there room in there in that design to offer an opportunity for some differentiated feedback throughout the writing process? And so this video we're going to share with you next, it's a fan favorite, and we pulled it back out of the archives because it is a college professor. So if you think about, man, how do I do that when I have this many kids, or even if it's air quotes only 36 kids in a day, it still could be an overwhelming piece of your day when differentiated feedback could still be a great option. So this is just a professor sharing how she goes about it with 150 kids or 170 kids, if I remember correctly. Go ahead, Becky.
Say that I do related to feedback is I use a tiered feedback system. So for every assignment that they do, every single person in my class, and I have 100 of them at a time, they get rubric feedback, which is just built into our learning management system. We use Moodle. So I use their rubric feature. So I can go through and just click, and that gets them some quantitative feedback. I also have areas where I can type in, a little short qualitative feedback, and I have a nice reference document of common problems. So it's not really that time intensive for me to cut and paste. So everybody gets that, and that's called level 1 feedback. After they get that feedback, they know that if they don't know how to get better, given the quantitative and the qualitative level 1 feedback, all they have to do to me is say, hey, Dr. Maslin, I want level 2, and that's available for all assignments. What level 2 is I open up their assignment, whatever it is, in like Word, and I annotate it using the comment feature. So I go line by line. This did get you points here. This didn't get you points here. I would change this next time to give them that really detailed feedback. The benefit of doing that is because honestly, I'd rather always give that much detailed feedback for every student, but I have 100 of them. It's not possible. So what this does is it matches my level of effort to the students who actually want that feedback and who have said, yes, I want it, I will use it. That's level 2. And then level 3 is after you get level 2, you still don't know, then we come into the office, we sit down, we make a plan. How are we going to do this different next time? And so I'll say, 100% of my students get level 1, about 20 request level 2 each time, 20%, and maybe 1 or 2 request level 3. So I found that to be a really good way to match my effort to their need. And they feel that sense of agency and that they're getting to choose what their feedback looks like. And they talk about that in my evaluations as something that's beneficial to them.
All right, thank you, Becky. So same process, just let's share out either in the chat or in the discussion board, what are some of those ideas and or tools that you use or know about to support assessment, how the learning is being demonstrated. Thank you. Keep typing away. You can multitask because I am like copy paste, copy paste. I love these ideas that I'll be using for myself as I work on my doctorate. Like that auditory one, listen to your written work, right? Because you've been staring at something too long. That if I had to highlight, I know we're short on time. If I had to highlight what I see on the discussion board is frequent, chunking, right? Which makes sense. I think about my sons back in the day, they used to be baseball players and the coaches would give this like, your hip this, your elbow that, right? That kind of precise feedback, of course, supported them overall. All right, let's end our session with environment.
All right, so like we talked a little about earlier, when we say environment, that can mean the physical space and navigating the physical space. So if we're using the same lesson goal, we could think about how students might not know where in the classroom to go to access certain tools. Those tools might be things like, where is that anchor chart that the teacher used for a mini lesson on certain punctuation? I don't know where that is, or where's the lined paper in the classroom? So we want to make sure that in addition to providing those options, students know where to go and access them. Becky, you want to talk through what you're showing us here?
Sure. So just like Sylvia said, really thinking about supporting our learners with the tools that they need for writing. So, and yes, this is a really beautiful writing center. It doesn't have to be this beautiful, but just the idea that your learners know, where do they go when their pen runs out of ink? Where do they go to get a new pen? When they need another sheet of paper, when they need a Post-it, that they know how to access those materials on their own. And then in the middle, we have an anchor chart. So supporting our learners with a way to reference some of the teaching that you've done around writing. And this particular one also has some some language supports on there as well, some sentence starters to connect evidence to reasons. And then the third picture is a word wall. And this is a math word wall. We need to support our learners in all areas with the tools to support their writing. So we chose this math word wall that has kind of visuals, and it actually really shows what it is, what that concept really is.
So Shamron dropped in the chat the link. We'll just do 1 minute for this one, but also consider that environmental barriers can be social emotional. A lot of you wrote about some negative experiences in the beginning when your EKG kind of writing journey around some probably not so great experiences. So how might you help minimize some of those barriers as well? Take 1 minute to jot down those ideas.
So continue to add ideas if you still are writing on the doc, but we know it is 4:29 and we have 1 minute to get you out of here. So we just wanted to remind you that each month we produce our California Coalition for Inclusive Literacy team. We produce 4 different items to support our theme. So the webinar was one of the items that we produced to support writing. We also have our Got a Minute modules, a featured resource from Learning Design, and a top tip sheet. And those can be found at our CESOL website that is on the slide, and I believe also in the chat. Please, please, please fill out the survey. We do really take your feedback to heart and use it to design our future sessions. This is our last one for this school year, but we will be taking a very short break before we start planning our next session. So we will use this feedback to design those.
If possible, keep writing on the discussion boards, right? Your colleagues, not only live in this session right now, will gain from your insight, but also I assume our colleagues that watch this in a couple of weeks or so in the summer, right, by the pool, can also contribute to that. But thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for participating and for your engagement. We know it's hard, especially in May after a full day of work. So thank you, thank you, thank you.